So Maine currently is a state where you can get an abortion for any reason at 9 months. 15, 16, 17-year-old kids can go get transgender drugs at the Planned Parenthood without their parents' knowledge or permission. Schools are routinely cutting parents out of decisions about the health and education. Rainbow flags, Pride Progress flags festoon every classroom and public space in this entire state, where we have school-based clinics popping up to hand out gender drugs and Zoloft and SSRIs and whatever in all these schools. And church attendance is probably at a record low. I haven't checked in recently. And you've decided, Nick, to step in and run the Christian Civic League of Maine. So what went into your what went into your thinking when you decided to step up to a challenge like that?
That's a fair question. Honestly, it's my kids. I have 5 kids. I'm raising them here in the state of Maine. And my wife and I both came to this conclusion that we either need to be engaged in a solution or we need to get out. There are other states that none of the things you described are really happening, and we could go there. But it had to be one or the other. We can't just keep residing in Rockport, Maine and enjoying the beauty of the state, but not figuring out how to help us move in a different direction. I also think that it's not as bad. It's as bad as what you're describing, but I don't think the future is as bad as what you're describing. I think we have a state legislature and a governor who think they have carte blanche to do whatever they want for as long as they want and continue to get away with it. They're acting like California. They're acting like New York. They're acting like these legislatures.
I'll say California, the governor of California has backpedaled on transgender sports. So we're actually to the left.
So we're actually to the left of California. Yeah, when you look at the Republican-Democrat makeup in those legislatures, the Republicans are barely in existence. In Maine, we're a couple of votes away from being able to stop all of this stuff. And so I think there's a significant overreach going on right now. It's gone on for the last few years. I think the Maine people are going to wake up and they're going to go, that's not what we want. That's not even what we elected. The legislature is much more down the middle than that. And I think there's hope for the future. It might not be in a year. We might not get everything we want in a year and a half at the next election. But I think we can work toward it. And we're closer than anybody wants to admit.
So I think most people probably not familiar with the history of the Christian Civic League itself. One of the oldest political advocacy groups in the state, been around for about 100 years. Had some trouble around the time of the gay marriage referendum. And then Carol Connolly, the former executive director, came in, took over the organization, rebuilt its credibility, and I think did a good job stewarding it to become the organization that you now inherit, rebuilding relationships and putting it on more solid footing. What do you see as the vision for the Christian Civic League going forward? And is there going to be a change that lawmakers are going to notice, that churches, pastors, that everyday voters are going to notice?
Yeah, I don't think you're not going to see a fundamental shift in direction of the Christian Civic League. To your point, Carol did an amazing job rebuilding the credibility of the organization. And in this particular world, it's extremely difficult to walk this line of we are full of deep conviction about issues that we believe are spiritual and moral in nature, but yet we have to execute on conversations around those issues in a way that's biblical and Christ-like, right? So it's not an easy line to walk, and I think Carol did a very good job of being a friend, a shepherd, a chaplain, really, in the State House, walking the line on tough issues. I think it's incumbent on me now that he's kind of done that rebuilding, to take it to the next level. And how can we be engaged in an even deeper way? How can we engage more churches? I think there's this misconception inside a lot of churches that what goes on in the State House is political, what happens in the church is spiritual, and there's not really a place where the two meet. I've spent the last 15 years working in this State House and state houses around the country, and what I've concluded is almost every issue we deal with is deeply spiritual at its core. And all the stuff you just mentioned as we opened here are issues that are spiritual in nature, and they're issues that the church needs to be engaged in, and they need to lead on. And I think we have a lot of pastors and a lot of churches in the state who are ready to go, ready to be part of influencing a culture in a biblical way for good, and hopefully changing what we see go on inside the State House.
Well, I think it kind of gets to a question that conservatives, Christians in politics wrangle with, which is the whole idea of turning the other cheek, rendering unto Caesar. There are, people, I've noticed there's a trend where people who aren't Christians like to interpret the Bible as saying that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, or that Christians shouldn't fight back in the political sphere because, hey, doesn't your book say that you're supposed to turn the other cheek when the governor forces 9-month abortions down your throat? Like, shouldn't you just turn the other cheek on that? So how do you reconcile those kind of biblical interpretations with an organization that is dedicated to being an expression of Christianity in the political sphere?
Yeah, it's hard to put turning the other cheek and then fighting for what is right in the same sentence, right? I think people do like to kind of misconstrue what Scripture says. We see Christ throughout the New Testament fighting for what he believed was right. We also saw him, where we saw him back down, it wasn't on things of conviction. It was on very much on the personal affronts, right? He allowed the Pharisees, he allowed the leaders in the temple to carry him to the cross. He allowed the Roman soldiers to lead him to Pilate, right? He turned the other cheek in those moments, but then he stood on the temple steps and he flipped the tables and said, no, this isn't how you treat God's house. God's house is for worship, and you've taken it and you've used it for something entirely different. He stood up and he fought for the woman who was caught in adultery, right? And he said, hey, listen, if you're without sin, you cast the first stone. He stood and he fought for her. And so we see these two different views, and you can't apply you shouldn't have any convictions, you should just roll over and accept whatever we say as good to go to the Christian community here. We have a responsibility to stand up for truth, to stand up for what's right. Now, the tough part is we have a responsibility to do it in a way that is also true to the grace and the love that Jesus Christ had, which is not always easy. And I can speak to that personally, right? It's not always easy to say hard things in a way that's true and loving.
Especially in the face of messaging that isn't similarly rooted. So I guess, is that a conception of Christianity in politics that you think a majority of pastors in this state share? Or are they coming around to see that politics isn't something that they can avoid from the pulpit?
I think sometimes there's this perception that what's going on in Augusta is overblown. It's not that bad. It's not. Well, they've taken some steps lately that have kind of set all that aside, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, everybody knows it is that bad. And it's all the things you just listed. And it's finally at our doors.
And also going back to COVID, we had a governor who suspended the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Suspended religious worship, essentially, in the state of Maine.
Yeah. No, and I think I think pastors and churches are at varying levels sometimes just based on the burden on that pastor and that congregation's heart. But at a minimum, I think we're seeing more and more churches are understanding that what's going on in Augusta is spiritual in nature, and it is their responsibility to have a voice in it. And again, maybe the voice looks different. Maybe some of them are here in Augusta. Maybe some of them are just preaching from the pulpit or engaging in their community. But more and more, I'm seeing churches ready and wanting to engage in a way that is going to move our culture forward in a biblical, God-honoring way.
Do you think that getting to the flock, do you think that the Christians at these churches hearing these messages, whether they're engaged in politics or not, do you think that they're voting in sufficient numbers? Because there does seem to be this idea of the Christian right voting as a block, but there's also a lot of survey data and anecdotal data to suggest that you have this problem of, Christian voter apathy. And I think it's along the lines of what Alexis de Tocqueville described as individualism, where people retreat from the public sphere and to take care of their own personal lives, because politics has become so messy and so acrimonious. And if you speak out at a school board meeting, it's not just that you've disagreed with somebody, it's that you're a bad person and you're going to be harangued and they're going to, you know, bomb your business with negative Google reviews or something. So the social cost of being in politics as a conservative, as a Christian, has been raised really, really high by the left.
Yeah.
And so you could see this tendency just to be like, you know what, I'm just going to take care of my family, I'm going to go to my church, I'm going to have my little circle of community and just let politics be politics and not worry about it. Do you see that as a problem that the league has to confront, and that you have to work with churches to confront?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are in Maine. That's some data that we need to do some work on. But I've heard nationally numbers as high as 40% of evangelical Christians that don't show up at the polls and vote. I have a hard time believing it's that high, knowing as many people as I know in churches. But any number, 20%. is too much, right? We have a responsibility to vote our convictions to ensure the public policy is a public policy that's founded on a biblical worldview. It's going to be founded on some worldview, right? And I believe strongly it should be a biblical one. So yeah, I think that's a battle we've got to fight. I got a question this week at a church I was speaking at, and this woman just said, "Does it matter?" She said, I don't. We all spoke on the abortion bill, and nobody listened.
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the biggest turnout that there's ever been for any bill in the history of the legislature.
Yeah.
I mean, we actually, the Maine Wire reported that Governor Mills' top OBGYN that she did press conferences with fled New Mexico after being sued for wrongful death because an abortion she led resulted in the death of a 23-year-old woman. The same procedure that she was trying to legalize here in Maine. Nobody cared.
Everything in that whole battle
nobody
should
cared.
have led decisions to, this is not a good idea. We need to vote this bill down. And yet it didn't happen. And so I had to say to her, I said, you know what? Right now, the way our legislature is, in many of these cases, it doesn't matter in that it's not going to change the outcome. The outcome is predetermined by the people in charge. But it does matter in that we cannot give up. We cannot disengage. We cannot be discouraged because it doesn't go our way. We have to continue to be in this battle. We have to continue to make sure our voices heard. But it certainly, when things like that happen, and when people have the sense that, and the number of people I've talked to who just think there's no hope for Maine. When you start to say, hey, it was right around 60 votes that made 3 House seats lose that would have changed who the speaker was. 60 votes.
There were Uokava votes, by the way, piped in over email from like Denmark. Thank you, Shenna Bellows.
Yeah.
That's a little off topic. But
yeah, but
worth
but
pointing out.
The point is worth pointing out. And when you get to a number that small, and then the details that it was Uokava votes, and if it wasn't for those votes, people go, oh, so we're not lost. So there is an opportunity for us to move ahead. But people need to understand that, right? And I don't think most do. And so between understanding that it's a spiritual battle, understanding that we have a responsibility to engage, and then understanding that there is actually a crack there. There is actually hope that we can start turning this ship around. I believe with all of those things, people are going to start to engage, and I think we really will see the ship start to turn.
Well, it should also give them encouragement that the opposition aren't that talented and they're kind of dumb. I don't know if you can bring that up in church at all.
I would probably hesitate to say it as they're dumb, but
there's an exaggerated sense that they're more powerful and more talented because they've never faced challenge or opposition. You see it we see it in the media world. They've never faced adversarial press, and they've never faced really committed, organized, talented opposition, and they've atrophied in many ways. I mean, we saw anytime national media comes to Maine or the national attention comes to Maine, you see them kind of wither because they're just not used to the kind of pressure and heat that brings.
Right.
So that should give a little bit of encouragement to people.
They've certainly seen the missteps in the last couple of months with Governor Mills in.
Yeah, so we should just get into the fight. I mean, Maine's right now still at the middle of this national firestorm because and I've said it a million times, but this is the best thing Janet Mills ever did for the state of Maine. This is the single greatest contribution she has ever given to the well-being of the state of Maine, was running her mouth at that breakfast and taunting the president and bringing his ire and his attention to the state of Maine. That's really the only good thing she's ever done for the state of Maine.
We're
I can speak more freely than,
right.
than
We're
you
talking
can.
here about a man who's not going to back down from China. He doesn't back down from NATO. He's not backing down from the EU. Do we really for a second think he's going to back down?
The Aaron Fry.
From our AG or our governor?
The legal might,
seems unlikely to
the
me.
searing legal brilliance of Aaron Fry.
If I had one wish going into the new Trump administration, it was that there would be people in the administration looking at what Maine is doing.
Yeah.
Because I believe that so much of what Maine's doing inside state government is in contradiction to where our voters nationally said we want the state to go. And I think I didn't expect Governor Mills to be the one to grant me that wish, but
and Jeremy
she
Kennedy,
really did.
Jeremy Kennedy helped. Governor Kennedy,
I've
I
heard
should say.
I've
Governor
heard rumors.
Kennedy
I've heard
helped.
heard the stories from some folks down there that certainly didn't hurt. And between that and the censure in the legislature and all of these things that are certainly an overreach, certainly the left out over their skis. What I hope is that it sinks in with Maine people and they see it and say, oh, that's up to me to change. That's up to me to get out and help. In some cases, that's up to me to run for office and help stop this and change it.
And I agree with your sentiment that Maine is out of step with where the zeitgeist is in terms of what the political leaders want and what voters in the state want, what Americans generally want. But I don't think it's an accident. I think it's intentional. I think it's because Maine has always been viewed as a petri dish or a trial ground for some of the things that the left would like to do, broadly speaking. And you can say, like, the left, it's not some big conspiracy. It's Arabella advisors, it's progressive donors, it's consultants and people who make a lot of money and enjoy these policies. But Maine's a cheap date. We've got three media markets.
That's what we always said.
They can come in and they can buy up the TV. The newspapers are already in the tank. They can get their policies passed, and then they can go to another state and say, look, Maine's already doing it. You guys can do it too. So we see ourselves as the unfortunate victims of that dynamic. And so I share your earlier wish to have Trump's attention here, because Maine really is, despite being in the national mind, a little bit of a backwater and kind of out of the way and just vacation land, is the front line for this political and spiritual battle for the future of the country. And I think that the 2026 election is going to be really a critical one. And I know that everybody says, going into 2016, it was the most important election of your life. In 2020, that's the most important election of your life. 2024, but for the future of Maine, I think 2026 is going to be very important, because we will have at that point have had 8 years of unbridled progressive experimentation. You had Governor Mills and a legislature doing whatever she wanted. So when it's like fighting the opioid epidemic, we did restorative justice, decriminalization, harm reduction. How'd that work out? We did on healthcare, we did Medicaid expansion. Whatever they wanted, we did that. How'd that work out? Our health outcomes better. Every single area of policy, they got what they wanted. And who's better in the state of Maine now? And so if after that 8-year experiment, there's not some kind of a bounce back in a different direction in 2026, then it's going to be very difficult for you to go into churches and make the case that there's hope.
So a couple things. One, the Medicaid expansion one's one of my favorite, because I spent so much time on the other side of that issue in the LePage administration, and to watch, and this is not just Medicaid expansion, but that one in particular, to look back and remember every single thing you said about it, and then see it coming true. It's home to roost. I mean, the overruns, the lack of ability to manage it, the health outcomes, all of that stuff has come true. We said it was going to happen 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and here we are. And so there's a little of, can we look back at where we were and look at what was said then and realize, wow, all that stuff's now coming true. Maybe they were right.
We should probably
maybe
just
we ought to head
we should sell LePage was right
the
t-shirts.
LePage because he was. One of the things that I want to be careful of in this role is getting caught in the 2-year cycle.
Yeah.
Politics lives in this 2-year cycle. I have kids. 2 years is both a long time in their life, but a very short time, right? I don't expect a transformed young adult from the ages of 8 to 10 years old. Real change, maturity takes time. And so for me, if we can make progress in the right direction in 2 years, or I guess a year and a half now, if we can make more progress in the right direction, I was kind of joking, but I guess I'm serious. I've got a 10-year-old, and by the time he's voting for the first time when he's 18, I would love to see Maine be a place that he's voting for conservative legislators and a conservative governor, and have it be a place where he looks and he goes, I kind of want to stay here, not just because my family's here and not just because I think it's beautiful, but because it's going to be a great place to start a business, and it's going to be a great place to raise my own children and educate my own children. And so, people will be discouraged in 2 years if we can't, take it all back and win. But I think we have to understand some of this stuff takes time, and the left is so much better at playing the long game and being patient. We've been a cheap date for a long time here in the state of Maine, and the left has known that, and they have poured money in to make sure that they, over time, incrementally get the results that they want. And we now need to do that if we want to win it back. And I hope with all the national attention we've gotten that maybe it's not just the left anymore noticing that Maine's a cheap date, but maybe there's some guys on the right who have resources that say, you know what, I want to invest in a place that has been known to be purple and see if maybe we can turn it around and turn it red.
And at least understand the national implications of what happens in Maine, because it doesn't just stay here. I mean, and that's true of California or Washington or Oklahoma or any other state. Bad ideas, once they're implemented, tend to spread and proliferate. And
ranked choice voting is a great.
Ranked choice voting. Marijuana legalization, opening yourself up to Chinese organized crime. That idea spreads too. So hopefully people increasingly see Maine as a place where not just that can be contested, but ought to be contested, not for the benefit of Maine, but for the benefit of the American people, broadly speaking. But I guess in the mix of that political fight, there's a class of political consultants who, tons of political consultants. Yeah. I know political consultants. Not all of them are moored to a Christian belief system or an ideology. Some of them are just mercenaries, hired guns. I think there'll be a lot of pressure from political consultants to take the message that the Christian Civic League has around some of these very sensitive issues and say, well, don't talk about abortion, or don't talk about the transgender issue, or don't talk about gay marriage, or don't talk about this. So how will you navigate those issues? Because very clearly, like if you're a Christian and you're in office, like you're going to have you're going to want to fix the abortion law. Like we have the most permissive abortion law in the planet. I mean, the Senate Democrats literally voted unanimously against a 4-year moratorium on selling dead baby parts. Yeah. Like we couldn't get elected Senate Democrats to draw the line at selling dead baby livers and kidneys.
I think
you might have to revisit that one. I don't know how you're working out on the campaign. There's a few things that are going to be revisited.
I'll try to stay away from what was the 2025 Project 2025. We won't do that. But
I'm still waiting for them to implement that. By the way, when does Shenna get put on a bus and sent down to CCOT in El Salvador?
Right.
It was a joke, by the way.
You're absolutely right. I am not going to pretend that a majority of Mainers are as conservative as I am on a number of issues, life being one of them. What I do believe is that there are a lot of values voters here in Maine that while they might not be as conservative as me on the issue, they don't want what you're talking about, right? They don't want dead baby parts sold. They don't want abortion up until the day that baby is going to be born. they are common sense, and they would like to see some of that stuff rolled back. They don't want boys and girls sports. They don't think gender transition is good for kids when they're still growing and they're still learning, still understanding better who they are.
And by the way, that's the convergence of scientific analysis.
The whole world except
on
us,
gender,
right?
Sex changes for kids.
Yeah.
Like, the science very clearly points to that not being great.
It's one of those things that shouldn't have taken science for us to get there. But
Right.
Yeah, the whole world except where we are seems to be moving in that direction. You said something earlier about Maine being, if not one of the most unchurched states in the nation. And I'm not going to dispute that data, but I grew up a pastor's kid. And in a small town, my dad was the pastor. And there were dozens of people around that little small town that considered him their pastor. And when there was a funeral, when there was a wedding, when there was any life event, when there was something hard, he was the one they called, even though they didn't darken the door of the church. And I think we have more of those type of people in the state who they've walked away from institutions because they've been burned by them, whether it's the church or whether it's a government institution or the local school. They've walked away from some of those institutions, but it doesn't change that they're a values voter. It doesn't change that at their core, they were shaped by going hunting with their grandfather. And they were shaped by strong marriages and family relationships, shaped by the influence that a church had in their community. And I think for a lot of those people, again, they might not be as conservative as me, but I think if they wake up and understand what's going on in our state, they're going to go, hey, wrong direction, let's turn this ship. And my hope is that a lot of those folks engage in a deep way.
And so how do you communicate specifically around the abortion issue where, the left wants nothing more than to be bailed out by putting Planned Parenthood money on the table here? Like the legislature actually just created a $12 million slush fund for Planned Parenthood and the Maine Family Planning Association, and that money will move to C4s and it'll get spent on politics and cycled into PACs. They're eager for some kind of political pretext to make the 2026 election not about Maine's dismal economy, our failing schools, the failure of progressivism over the last 8 years, or trans boys playing girls' sports. They would love to make this another 2022,
right,
which ended up being abortion because of national politics hugely salient. So how do you communicate about that with candidates, and how do candidates communicate about their views and their policy preferences around abortion in a way that the hired gun political consultants aren't going to get itchy about?
Well,
or do we even care if they're itchy?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can make political consultants not itchy about a social issue like abortion. They sold a lot of fear in 2022. They sold a lot of anti-woman. They sold a lot of essentially if you're pro-life, you hate vulnerable women in difficult circumstances. Which,
like the vulnerable woman who died in New Mexico because Janet Mills' OBGYN was performing an abortion.
Yeah, man, like
that vulnerable
like
woman?
the stuff we're hearing about with the chemical abortions that are going on nationally. We have very little regulation around chemical abortion. You don't have to see a doctor.
Yeah.
There's this article in a Pennsylvania paper not too long ago where the police showed up because they found a baby buried in the backyard. This was sold to this young woman as safe and effective and no big deal, and somebody from out of state sent her some pills. She took the pills and a baby came out. And there's a string of text messages where she's texting her neighbor saying, like, it looks like a baby. It cried like a baby. Somebody sold her a lie. And I think we the right need to do a better job talking about the lie that's being sold to these young women, rather than vilifying them, but tell them the truth and give them options. And I'm not going to tell you that it's always going to be, the political consultant's dream of talking points. But I think people that show up with deep conviction, and they show up with conviction that's not damning someone to hell, but conviction that is through a difficult time going to love and care for somebody that's going to take care of that girl, instead of sending her a pill in the mail and saying, this is compassion, we love you, good luck.
Yeah, this is reproductive care.
Or this is medical care of any kind, right? It clearly wasn't. And we see there's a number of stories nationally that you see where there's literally deaths involved because of what's going on in that industry. And I think we have a responsibility to tell those stories, but again, to tell them in a way that is true, to tell them in a way that's compassionate, and to try to dispel the lie that the abortion industry has pushed out there. And there's so much more going on in the abortion industry, right? In the Planned Parenthood world, it's not even just abortion, but it is.
It's a business.
It's a business.
It's a diversified business.
It's a business model. They have diversified into a lot of the gender stuff. We wonder where the opposition comes from. And for me, as somebody who is a Christian, it's anti-biblical, right? It's anti who God is. God is full of grace and full of compassion. He also created life, and He loves life. He loves the people that He created. And we have a responsibility to tell that story. And again, it won't always be popular. Boy, if you could please all the political consultants, we wouldn't need so many, because, without all the differing opinions, why would you pay so much?
Yeah, wouldn't that be a blessing?
Right, right.
But it doesn't. I mean, like, within our lifetime, the consensus on the Democratic Party on the left, the party of abortion, was that it should be safe, legal, and rare. We seem to have lost the rare part.
Yeah.
And so, it seems like you could break up the argument into two camps. Like, do you think that society would be better with fewer abortions or more abortions? Regardless of the laws around abortion, do you think we should have more abortion or less abortion or fewer? And if you can't get someone to agree that we'd be better off with fewer abortions, then they're probably not going to be persuadable around any aspect of policy. But I think even a lot of people who are supportive of the legislation that the Governor Mills signed would say that, in each instance where there is an abortion, it's a tragic situation, and we would prefer to have fewer abortions. If you can have a conversation about that, and how do we get to a point where we're reducing the number of women who feel like they're in that circumstance and feel compelled to take this to undergo this life-changing and life-ending procedure, maybe that could be a more productive conversation with moderates and persuadables. But there does seem to be this weird thing where they're shout your abortion, celebrate your abortion. Yeah. There seems to be a party of death impulse where they've gone so far away from safe, legal, and rare.
Well, and when I say that I think many of the issues in the State House are not political, they're spiritual, I mean, that's the root of it, right? When you decide that we're going to celebrate death over celebrating life. It's absolutely the root of it.
Do you think that is there a counterpart financially to what Planned Parenthood could offer? It seems like the left is so good about finding ways to use taxpayer money to support their politics. And what we just mentioned, this abortion slush fund that they just signed into law, is a perfect example of it. Because you, me, every Christian in this state is paying taxes. A pro-abortion Democrat-controlled legislature just took our taxpayer money, put it into a slush fund, and it's now going to be going to these abortion clinic operators, and at least some of it is going to trickle into politics to help re-elect pro-abortion people.
Yep.
There's no analogous way that Christians are funding pro-life act. There's no fund going.
No, because we don't own the government right now,
healthcare centers. And there are plenty of non-abortion maternal care facilities in the state of Maine, but the left actually works to defund them. But there's no analogous way for conservatives to tap into conservative money. I mean, to taxpayer money, and we don't believe in that anyway. So wouldn't. So I guess, are we handicapped in that regard? And what can you do to level the financial playing field?
I'll try to come up with an answer on leveling the financial playing field, and I'll come back to you on that.
Okay, yeah. Well, besides all the wealthy Christians opening their wallets and giving generously to the Christian Civic League.
It's a big question. Yeah. One of the answers I would give you, and this is the answer that I would give a church, I believe that God is a creator, that God does provide for missions. And it's my favorite thing about the Old Testament. We were talking about the Old Testament, New Testament before we started. My favorite thing about the Old Testament is you watch God provide in difficult circumstances when it's his mission, right? The story of Gideon is this awesome story where he gets all the guys and he's ready to go because he thinks like, I've got all the guys. I can go beat the enemy. And God says, no, you got too many. So he sends some home. And then he sends some more home. He ends up going with 300 guys. And the story is God saying to Gideon, essentially, I needed you to know that I could do it, right? And so there's a spiritual component to this that's not just financial for me as a believer. There also is that strategic financial component, and there is no equivalent on the right. And I think we could go way down a rabbit hole here on Doge and all that, but I spent about 6 years working at the Department of Health and Human Services. And what I could tell you is if every conservative pulled all the grants that DHHS has gotten over the last 25 years from the federal government and from CDC and all these different places and read the small print, you would discover that for decades, many of these dollars were already dedicated to the same mission that our $12 million in Planned Parenthood money wants to support, right? They have been successfully using the system for decades. My tax dollars, your tax dollars. And I get there's fear around, what the Trump administration is doing and Doge and the cutting off the grants. There's no way to stop the bleeding if you don't just stop it. And so I have so much respect for what's going on because it's hard. Having lived in that world, it is far harder to cut something. Everybody wants to say, oh, they're just rashly cutting. It is so difficult to determine where the cuts need to happen and then make the cuts. And they're doing it. I'm not going to say I think every single one of them is exactly the right thing, but there's an awful lot of tax dollars going to things that you and I personally certainly wouldn't support. And I think a lot of both conservatives and folks in the middle, if they just understood what their dollars were buying, would say, that's not okay. I would never give my dollars to that if I had the choice. And yet their dollars are going to it.
So the legislative session that we're currently in is basically coming to an end. Not as eventful.
We can only hope.
We can hope. But by and large, all the important decisions have been made. They went ahead and spent $12 billion. They're still going to have to raise taxes to fund Medicaid for fiscal year 2027. But a lot of the big fights have already played out. I mean, and really, they did everything they wanted in the first, six years. What's left for them to really do, other than build a shrine to Moloch in the middle of the State House? I don't know what else they could do.
Directly appropriating money to their.
Well, yes,
to their,
I mean, they're like directly funding the abortion clinic operators. It's about as corrupt as it gets.
Somebody to give me $12 million? That would be great.
Yeah, I was gonna say they've basically done everything they could do. So I guess what are the remaining legislative priorities that the Christian Civic League is focused on? I know we still have this censure of Representative Laurel Libby revolving around the issue of biological males beating up on females in sports. Is there anything else that the league is focused on as this legislative session blissfully winds down to an end?
What's left to be heard in committee, it really is those. There are three men and women's sports bills. Personally, like Representative Liz Caruso has a really solid piece of legislation on that issue. There's a bill that Senator Hagan has that is all it's doing is rolling back what passed 2 years ago around 16 and 17-year-olds being able to embark on that gender transition journey without their parents' consent.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some really basic, what everybody in the real world would consider very common sense pieces of legislation that still have not even been heard. I believe next week is the deadline, so I'm going to take a wild guess and say, that first week of May, they're going to hear those bills. Those are the big things that are still left outstanding. I didn't come into the legislative session with high expectations for what we could achieve. We start by working in the business of hearts, right? Can we change hearts? Can we change hearts and minds? And if we can't change hearts and minds, then we need to be part of the solution. We need to change the butts in the seats. Mm-hmm. And I came into this session with, a little bit of optimism that maybe some things would go our way, but not a lot. And come to find out it's futile to have any optimism on where this legislature is going to go. It's been even worse than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at the case of Bruce White, former Representative Bruce White, who had the audacity to step out of line on 9-month abortion on demand for any reason whatsoever, and had Planned Parenthood specifically dump money into his little state rep seat, knock him off in the primary, and put a pro-abortion Democrat in his place. And I think that sent a signal to all the Democrats.
Yeah, it did. And I don't know Bruce well personally, but I think if you talk to him, he doesn't want to be a Republican.
Yeah,
right?
he was pretty far left Democrat on everything.
He's not a conservative, but he is a man of conviction on those social issues, and there is no room to disagree. There is no room to vote the other way on some of those, because it's become doctrine inside the left in the State House.
And so I guess the legislative session comes to an end. I'm just going to guess that all of those pieces of legislation you referred to fail and get voted down. I would not have expected the rainbow bullies who run the legislature to be as committed to this whole censure thing. I have to believe they know it's a political loser, but are they committed to it. So I think that they're probably going to be, that same zealousness is going to extend to these pieces of
There's
legislation.
this little piece of hope in me still that is like, well, maybe they'll do the right thing.
You haven't spent enough time at the State House. That Christian optimism needs to be
But so
snuffed
far,
out.
in all my years at the State House, that little bit of optimism has been found to be a false hope.
I guess we got to kindle it and keep it alive. Otherwise, the light will go out from your eyes.
You can't work in the building without a little bit of optimism, or you'd walk away too discouraged every day.
So I guess the focus turns then to 2026. There'll be the legislature. It's going to be a very interesting year just from a political science standpoint, because you've got the CD2 with, I guess, Representative Jared Golden possibly stepping down to run for governor. So that could open up a seat there, and maybe some candidates decide maybe not to run for governor's office, to run for an open Democratic seat up there. The former Governor Paul LePage is coming back to run for the 2nd Congressional District, possibly a 3-way race at the gubernatorial level, and Senator Collins is up for re-election. So there's all kinds of interesting dynamics going on. I guess, how do you guys, as a 501c4 organization, that you guys are involved in politics, what are going to be your priorities, your focus, what's your strategy? Don't say your secret strategy, your public strategy going into the 2026 elections.
I mean, from where I sit, my primary objective is to inform, equip, and engage, and I hope inspire churches to engage in what's going on, and engage hopefully more than just vote, but at a minimum, show up and vote. But to engage in what a campaign looks like, and I was joking with somebody the other day. It tends to be Republicans more often than Democrats, right? But I'm somewhere like between the far right conservatives and Republicans. I rarely find myself between the Republicans and the Democrats from a party standpoint. But we need churches to stand up and say, hey, this person aligns with my biblical perspective, and I'm going to vote for them. And so I hope we can inspire churches to do that, and I hope we can inspire some of the values voters that we talked about earlier, who maybe aren't as conservative on a life issue as me, but they do hold the values that shaped them very highly. And I think if those guys show up, I think it will make the difference in 2026.
What do you think of the stakes of the election in 2026?
I don't think we can handle 2 more years at the pace that the left is going. I don't think we can handle 2 more years of a trifecta here in the State House. We need to have a little bit of accountability. And so at a minimum, I hope at least one of those chambers or the governor's seat changes so that there's a little bit of accountability. As much as I hate to admit it, often the best government is the government where it's not all one party. And there's a little bit of friction, because that friction, not the kind of friction we're having right now over there, but like that friction between perspectives will sharpen people. And so I hope at a minimum that's what we get. I will not even begin to try to predict what's going to happen with our gubernatorial race and who's going to get in and who's not going to get in and what. I've heard so many rumors at this point that I feel like I really don't know, but I do think I'm optimistic we'll see the 2nd Congressional District change. Governor LePage will be fun to have around again, and
I think Trump probably thinks similarly.
Yes, yeah. I also I was joking with somebody at the State House the other day. I'm excited to see Governor LePage in Congress. As governor, I mean, he's an executive, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but I can't say enough good about how I watched him govern on the inside, right? You get to see a different person sometimes on the inside. And I'm kind of excited to see him in Congress, where really your responsibility is to vote, right? You're not running a whole state. It's going to be fun. The recordings, the things that I'm certain he will push on will be both entertaining, but also will push us in the right direction. So,
I guess, what do you think, what would be the consequences of, a repeat of what happened in 2024 and 2026? Like what, say the trifecta continues, what do they do? What could the left do with another 2 years of a trifecta that they haven't done already?
Maybe the one positive is they've had it long enough that they've spent all the money. And so they will have to spend a couple of years trying to figure out how to get more money in order to keep doing the things they want to do. So there may be a pause.
So the millionaire's tax, perhaps?
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't even know where they will go first, but it's at least a slowdown. There's the old, LePage did such a good job managing state government and left it in such good shape that the unfortunate consequence was it allowed them to then not really manage state government and just do the ideological things they wanted to do.
Spend down the treasure that LePage had stored up, putting the house in order.
Exactly.
It feels like that could be where we're, taking a long-term view. It feels like that's the cycle we're stuck on.
Right.
The progressive left comes in, makes a mess of things, and then you have someone like LePage comes in and says, well, no, we're going to pay off the hospitals, we're going to fix our welfare programs, we're going to trim down the government, and then the left comes back in because the political pendulum swings back the other way. It's like, well, I guess maybe we're setting ourselves up for then another cleaning house cycle, and then 8 or 9 years.
I hope that's not what happens
now.
exactly, but yes, yeah.
It does seem like that's a pattern. Well, Nick Adolphsen, thank you very much for talking with us, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do with the Christian Civic League, and hopefully you have a very aggressive modern digital media communications strategy.
We're working on it. Slow but sure. Slow but sure.
All right,
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it.